Political analyst James Dorsey is joining us now to discuss the latest developments from the Middle East and the war's potential impact on the upcoming American elections. Good afternoon, James. Thanks for joining us on NewsHour.
Always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Now, how do you see the Israeli genocide in Gaza influencing US presidential politics, particularly with the upcoming election on the 5th of November? And given that the US foreign policy rarely plays a pivotal role in elections, do you think this year is a turning point where events in the Middle East directly impact electoral outcomes?
The answer is yes and no. As a matter of principle, foreign policy is not the major issue in this election. It is potentially the major issue because this is going to be a vote that likely comes down to both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris needing every single vote they can get, particularly in the battleground states. So in a state like Michigan, where you have a significant Muslim and Arab population, those votes are going to count for much more than they usually would because of the importance of the state and because of the neck-to-neck race between Trump and Harris.
Okay, now President Biden's continued support for Israel raises questions about American influence in the region. At the same time, Netanyahu's resistance to US calls for ceasefires reflect deeper divisions in the US-Israel relations. Now, how do you evaluate the assertion that the US remains the most significant external power in the Middle East, especially when its leverage appears limited by Israel's actions?
I think there are, again, several issues here. Issue number one is, what leverage does the United States have over Israel? And we're not quite clear on that. And what leverage is the United States willing to exert on Israel? And then the other issue is, of course, what leverage does the United States have in the Middle East? And what credibility does it have because of the support for Israel? On the issue of whether or not the United States has leverage over Israel, I think what we've seen in the last several days, if you wish, is increasingly the issue of humanitarian aid and the solvability of the Palestine Authority on the West Bank becoming a dividing issue between the United States, its Western allies, and Israel. So you've seen a letter going from the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, and 7 other Western allies of the United States, including Europeans, warning Benjamin Netanyahu that the effort to financially strangle the Palestine Authority in the West Bank was going to endanger Israeli security and threaten further the Middle East stability. You saw the letter by Secretaries of Defense Austin and Secretary of State Blinken to Benjamin Netanyahu and to the Israeli government, giving them 30 days to improve the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. And you've seen very strong statements from the United States on the banning by Israel of unprecedented of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. So we're going to have to see how that develops, but there obviously is some degree of movement there. Let me leave it there for now.
Okay. All right. Now, if Kamala Harris were to win the presidency, what specific foreign policy changes do you anticipate? And do you believe she could chart a different course compared to Biden?
I think it's everybody's guess. What I do think is we don't know. Kamala Harris has the disadvantage that she is a Democratic Party's candidate, and at the same time, she still is the vice president in the Biden administration. So it's very difficult for her to go out and break radically with Biden administration policy. That's not to say that she will break radically. One gets the impression that she is going to be somewhat more critical of Israel, and one gets the impression that she's going to be somewhat more empathetic towards the Palestinians. We're only going to see that after the election. So from the moment the elections are over till the 20th of January next year, when the new president comes in, the administration is going to have greater flexibility in what it does because it's no longer inhibited by electoral politics. If Kamala Harris is the new president, she's going to have greater flexibility, and that's when we're going to know.
Okay, do you think that Kamala Harris will be able to reinstill trust among the Muslim population in the United States that have been very, very disappointed by the way the Biden administration has handled trying to curb what's been happening in Gaza?
The proof is going to be in the pudding. Once we know what Kamala Harris's policies may be, then we'll see whether those policies go far enough to restore credit in Kamala Harris. Let's be clear about it. Whatever Kamala Harris does is likely going to be far better than what Trump as a president would offer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, what are the political ramifications for Netanyahu as Israelis demand accountability for perceived security lapses in the 7th October Hamas attacks? And could public sentiment potentially impact his political future?
Public sentiment will definitely impact his political future. There's no question about it. He may be riding high at the moment. He's doing better in the polls than he has done since October 7 of last year. But ultimately, there is going to be a reckoning, and he will not be able to avoid that. Israel will have an inquiry into what happened, what led up to the October 7 attack on Israel, and the intelligence and military failures. Past experience with such inquiries in Israel is that they can lead to the fall of governments. But as long as you have this war going on, both in Gaza and in Lebanon, and potentially, depending on what happens in the exchange of hostilities, the tit for tat with Iran, I think that you're not going to see a lot of threat to Netanyahu's position.
Okay. Now, lastly, James, some Arab and Muslim American leaders endorsed Republican presidential nominee and former President Donald Trump during a campaign rally on Saturday in Michigan. But on Sunday, we saw during another rally in New York that Rudy Giuliani launched a tirade of racist attacks against Palestinians. What do you make of this double standard approach by the Republicans?
Well, what I think is it's a failure or a mistake on the part of the Muslim leadership in the United States now, or those Muslim leaders that joined Trump in the last few days. Now, to be clear, it's their choice, and they have the freedom of choice between Kamala Harris and Trump. But if they are voting for Trump as a protest against the Biden administration's policy towards Israel, it's like the frog jumping from the hot water into the frying pan. Trump's policy consistently has been a pro-Israeli policy. He basically threw Palestinian rights out the window during his presidency. He was the one who defunded UNRWA. He was the one who basically closed the Palestine Authority's office in Washington. He came up with an economic plan, not for the Palestinians, not a plan for Palestinian national rights. He recognized Israeli annexation of East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. He's in this campaign said, let the Israelis finish it and get it done fast. With other words, he didn't care about the casualties that already were being caused by Israel's war conduct, and that would be conduct by an Israel that was unleashed fully with no restrictions by an U.S. administration.
Mm-hmm. Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much, James, for joining us. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for your insight.
Always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.